So once again, welcome to Cleantech Conversations, which is an online event series by the National Cleantech Conference and Exhibition. My name is Tiffany Bauer and I am the Program Director for the National Cleantech Conference, which will be taking place in Brisbane in March 2021. Just some quick housekeeping before I do a bit of an introduction. This session will be recorded and the recording will be uploaded and distributed post-event. We welcome questions and these can be entered into the Q&A section by clicking on the icon at the bottom of your screen. We will endeavour to answer these questions throughout the session and we welcome as many as you have. We have a few live polls today that will come up on screen during the session. You'll have around 20 seconds to answer those and results will be available immediately. The session will run for approximately 45 minutes with some additional time allocated for Q&A. So today we are discussing making Cleantech's voice heard, why clustering is more important than ever. This is supported by the Tci Network, Economic Development Australia, Clusters of Change and the Victorian Cleantech Cluster. This webinar actually builds on a key theme from our 2019 conference where one of our panellists today, Bianca Dragomir, was our international keynote speaker. So we're really pleased to have Bianca back today and joining us to talk about this important topic. Just a little bit of background about the Tci Network. It is a non-profit, non-governmental organisation open to members all over the world. It is the leading global network of people and organisations working in clusters and innovations ecosystems. They create global connections, inspire clusters and improve policy learning. The Tci Network has helped us bring together a fantastic panel of cluster experts from Australia and Europe to share their knowledge on how innovation clusters can help forward an industry, how they work and the role that they play in system innovation and sustainability transition. I'd like to introduce our panel facilitator today, Jacqueline Brinkman, who is the CEO of Economic Development Australia. EDA is the national peak body for economic development. Under Jacqueline's leadership, EDA membership has more than tripled to over 900 members in less than 3 years. Jacqueline is one of Australia's most experienced industry cluster managers and has facilitated industry development and new investment across a range of sectors. Her advocacy and lobbying has resulted in legislative change at a local, state and federal level. So Jacqueline, I will hand the microphone over to you now and let you introduce our two panellists.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. It's just wonderful to be joining the session today. I am really pleased that we can bring these speakers to our audience, and thank you for everything that you do to organise this event and bring people in the sector together in this way. So I am just going to launch straight into introducing our panellists today. I'll start with Nigel Murphy, who is the Director of Earth Systems. And he is also the chair of the Victorian Cleantech Cluster. Nigel is most definitely passionate about developing a strong cleantech sector in Victoria and Australia. He is a founder and director of Earth Systems and Cyclic Carbon. And now these companies have been actively innovating and commercialising technology in the cleantech sector for over 25 years. Nigel is the current chair of the Victorian Cleantech Cluster, which is a not-for-profit membership-based organisation, and we'll hear a lot more about that in the session to follow. His cleantech experience covers product development, IP protection, capital raising, commercialisation and market development. Nigel has degrees in environmental and earth sciences and experience in working in Australia, China, Southeast Asia, Africa and the Pacific. He's provided technical advice to companies, government, financial institutions and the aid sector in environmental science, cleantech and environmental management. He is an honorary life member of the Environment Institute of Australia and New Zealand and was the foundation chair of the Certified Environmental Practitioner Scheme for Australia and New Zealand. What we like to say in the cluster world is that our cluster champions need to have skin in the game and passion. And And that is absolutely evident with Nigel, and I'm sure the audience today will really appreciate the insights he will bring about the state of play in Australia and the opportunities that clustering presents for this sector to really position itself more competitively. Now, our other co-presenter today is Bianca Dragomir, who is the CEO of the Valencian Region Renewable Energy Cluster. Now, Bianca is absolutely on a mission to instill purpose, speed and scalability in cluster management, in particular to meet climate goals. Now, Bianca's mantra is, how do we replace the status quo with open, entrepreneurship-driven ecosystems? And she is for sure leading a new generation of clusters across Europe and beyond. Bianca was awarded Cluster Manager of the Year by the European Commission for her work as CEO of the Valencian Cleantech Cluster, Avayasum. Now that Cluster Manager of the Year title actually lasted 2 years. So, you know, that's something in itself, I think. Now, as Ambassador to 2,500 clusters, Bianca has advised the European High-Level Industry Roundtable, Industry 2030, on developing a smart, innovative and sustainable industrial strategy for the future of Europe, with a funding opportunity of around €1 trillion. Bianca launched the first EIT Climate KIC Cleantech Startup Accelerator in Spain and expanded it to 12 EU countries. She created Spain's first smart cities think tank and quickly replicated it in other regions. Bianca is truly a global cluster leader, and we're very fortunate that she's joined us today from Spain, where she's enjoying an unusual summer, I would say, in 2020. So thank you both for joining the session today. Now, when we were chatting about how we would launch today's discussion, we talked about how we know that everybody joining us is really looking forward to insights from both of you around how, in this ever-changing world, clustering can help improve the competitiveness of sectors such as Australia's clean tech sector. So I thought perhaps to kick us off today, it might be helpful to drill down a little bit into the definition of clusters. Now, I know Nigel and I've spoken about this, particularly in Australia. Clustering has suffered a bit of a PR problem. You know, people sometimes don't quite understand what it is that we're talking about when we use the term clusters. How is it different to simply establishing a national peak body or a networking group or a lobbying association? So now I'm going to take the opportunity, as we have the European Cluster Manager of the Year with us today. I can't think of a better person to define clustering for us. So I'd love to hand over to you now, Bianca, to talk to us a little bit about exactly what we're talking about when we talk about clusters.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I'm delighted to be part of this webinar. Well, to make a start, clusters are basically networks that unite business, unite government, research or academia, and the investment community in a particular industry and in a particular region, creating an innovation ecosystem altogether. And clusters definitions may seem sometimes fluid because we have numerous amount of clusters only in Europe. There are 2,500 clusters alone, spread over more than 280 regions. Each of these regions work with different types of sectorial productive sectors, and therefore with different industrial sectors. So there are different formulas. But I like to look at clusters as basically those value creation networks that connect the right people at the right place at the right time to drive innovation and exponential growth in a particular industry. And it is already proven that businesses in a cluster create more jobs, so they do better, that people earn higher than average salaries in the businesses in a cluster, and that businesses in a cluster create more patents. So therefore, there's more innovation to market. So I think that is the power of a cluster. By bringing all these stakeholders together at the same table, they manage to multiply impact, to scale up impact. And in this way, clusters turn themselves into hotspots for innovation and for scaling up, replicating this innovation into market.
That's great. Thank you, Bianca. And one of the best, most succinct definitions of clusters I think I've ever heard. And I love that idea of that environment of connectivity is the thing that really drives innovation, and that's what we see over and over. Nigel, can you tell us what Cleantech clusters exist in Australia, what clustering initiatives are happening now, and what, in your view, are the essential ingredients of a successful cluster?
Yes, thanks, Jacqueline. Look, I think Australia has there's been initiatives that have been close to clustering in the past. There was an Environmental Management Industry Association of Australia that was really formed in the 1990s, which had a lot of the elements of clustering. There's been other initiatives like the in Adelaide, a Water Industry Alliance was established in 1998 and is still strong and is very much a cluster. So there's certainly been clustering activities that have occurred. There's been a Geelong cluster since 2013. There was an initiative led by John O'Brien for in the clean tech sector for bringing clean tech companies together in Australia. One of the problems that we've had though is almost the tyranny of distance. Trying to establish things at an Australian level doesn't always work because of the doesn't align with the state governments, and the local government framework. So some initiatives I think that have been clustering initiatives that have been attempted at the national level probably haven't quite been as successful in the clean tech area. So I think that's one of the key ingredients. You need to have a linkage, a strong linkage in geography and purpose. And if it's too broad, it's hard to work. You also need to have the passion, and you need to bring parties together so that they can see that it's of interest and it's going to demonstrate outcomes for each of the members in that cluster. And I think one of the really important points that a cluster does is that it brings together, not just the private sector and government, but it also, very important, is the research institutions and also the capital. Without capital, innovation is hard, but commercialization is impossible. So I think that the key thing with a cluster is bringing together a group that can work and almost feed off each other, benefit from what others bring to the table, and it's definitely a collaborative approach.
Yeah, and can you paint the picture for us, sort of where is the action in Australia? Where do you see some really good collaboration happening, and be that very localised, linked to place and expertise on the ground, or a more broader initiative?
Well, look, I think, in the clean tech sector, I think in Australia, we've often tried to sort of separate government initiatives have been separate from the private sector, and research has been separate. So I don't think we've come together necessarily that well until fairly recently. There's been a major shift in the last few years, and It's shifts that, in thinking that, if we need to have a circular economy, how do we do that? Because we're talking about waste, we're talking about energy, we're talking about water, we're talking about a lot of disparate things that need to come together to create outcomes. And it's only through clustering, it's only through working together, aligning the private sector with government policy and aligning with research and development, and aligning with capital, that we're going to see actual outcomes that generate economic activity and jobs.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you talked about, not having just a couple of players at the table, that there was a sort of, a particular recipe there that needed to, a few essential ingredients that needed to be present in order for a cluster to manifest and be successful. Bianca, can you talk a bit more about that? What's critical in terms of the right ingredients for a cluster?
Well, I couldn't be more in agreement with Nigel that, especially when we think about Cleantech, and for example, Nigel, you gave the example of circular economy. We do need to think about integrating multiple levels, right? And that's where the power of clustering and clusters lies. And if I have to speak about ingredients, I would think, when clusters are more successful is when they are industry-led. Because industry is where the pain of a particular sector lies, is where the tendency, you can see what are the tendencies and the trends in a particular sector. So therefore, innovators can come up with solutions, can experiment, can test, can validate, and then they can scale up innovation. But also, if we have the right intelligence gathering bottom up, from the industry, from the business sector, then government, if government listens, can co-design policies and can leverage investment where exactly is needed. So in this fashion, we go with higher speeds, with more focus, and with more impact, which is what we definitely need, especially when we speak about the biggest challenges that humanity is facing, like the climate change or the clean technologies deployment, the energy transition, the circular economy transition. So particularly when we speak about clean tech, I think that clustering is important, and that would be the main ingredient. And then definitely I think that another key ingredient is to have the right leadership. We need cluster managers. We need cluster managers to enhance a proper leadership, to become those leaders of change, to integrate systems properly. At the end of the day, clustering means a sophisticated orchestration of different stakeholders, different layers, and the proper integration of this multiple voice, of these multiple needs of different stakeholders, the government, the business, the academia, and the venture capitalists, the investment community, who is thirsty to invest, to find solutions, to invest in where it's needed. But we need to get these players at the same table, speak to them in a different way, in a way that engages them and energizes them to create these shifts that we so much need. And that's why clusters are powerful beyond measure, because they can have this multiplied impact. They are these hotspots for value creation and for scaling up innovation to the market with a lot of speed.
Fantastic. So I think we've introduced quite in a compelling way what a cluster is, what it should look like, and what those ingredients are. Before we go too much further, I think we've got a poll ready, which just asks our attendees today what they hope to learn from the conversation. So there's some options there. Let us know if you're interested in setting up a cluster, to learn more about the potential of clusters, or connect with others interested in clustering. Just do a quick, I think Tiffany said something like 10 seconds or something. Really, it's only going to be there for a very short time. So just answer those and let us know, and we'll try and make sure we weave our conversation to really address what you're seeking today. Now, I know from talking to both of you that that the clean tech sector, both of you indicate that the clean tech sector is one that really does lend itself to the cluster model. And I think that's interesting, you know, that some sectors are more suited possibly to a clustering initiative. Nigel, could you tell us a bit more about that? That would be great.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, the example of say in Victoria that the state government has a circular economy policy, and that they're implementing, which is great. But how do you implement something like a circular economy policy? It's just cuts across almost everything, and it requires government to work with industry, you know, government. State government to work with local government. It requires so many different ingredients to make that happen. And I think that in the clean tech sector, we are used to working in an integrated fashion, because the environment, it doesn't have state boundaries, it doesn't have local council boundaries, it doesn't have international boundaries. So we are collaborative in our nature and essence, and I think the clean tech sector is passionate about trying to create outcomes, and the only way we can change the model, the economic models that we're working, that are currently working in our society, is through collaboration, and clustering is that's the essence of a cluster, is collaboration, creating something greater than what individual organisations or a government can do. And so I think that it's, you know, the cluster is the perfect model for you know, creating outcomes in the clean tech sector.
And Bianca, you've certainly seen that, haven't you?
Yes, I live it on my own skin, to say so as well, in the adolescent cluster, where we deal with sustainable energy in a very broad way. In our Cleantech cluster, we deal with renewable energies, with energy efficiency in buildings, with circular economy, with smart cities, with water cycle, with waste management. And as Nigel said, Cleantech is very diverse. So we need to integrate many systems, and there are many interdependencies between all these subsectors of the Cleantech. So that is why collaboration is key, because also let's think about, for example, mobility, clean mobility. We cannot think only about electric vehicles infrastructure. We need to think about how we design our cities, how we design that infrastructure, how the government thinks about designing that, how can we co-create with the government. But also we need to think about the integration of renewables into the EV chargers. We also need to think how the citizen behavior is evolving. So there are different systems, there are different ways. We need to look at the social, we need to look at the technological part, we need to look at the business models and at the behavior. So there are many things that only if we look at the clean mobility come into the picture. And that influences directly the way investors think, the motivation of the investment community, the motivation of the government, the funding that is at hand, how we integrate this funding, how we trigger the motivation in the business to innovate, how we create this shift from traditional models to more disruptive models. So that's what clusters can do. And that's why for clusters and Cleantech is a match made in heaven, because it's the perfect sector where we can see clustering, which is basically open innovation in practice. And as I said before, we need the right leadership. We need an open, multi-collaborative, bold leadership in this sector. I don't see this sector creating big shifts without a collaborative effort. We need open governance. We need polycentric leadership, I would say, performing experiments, innovation experiments at different levels, and looking to enhance collaboration with maybe even unusual stakeholders, bringing them at the table. That's where the magic starts, and I think that's how a cluster can become successful. And I think this new paradigm that we are living, especially in cleantech, already before the COVID-19 crisis, is very much indicating us that clusters are becoming necessary more than ever. And the right tool and the right mechanism, smart mechanism at hand to create these new paradigms and to manage, orchestrate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Nigel, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, look, I just totally agree with Bianca. I think, yeah, look, it's we're coming into a really interesting time for the clean tech sector, because I think I have seen really the winds change over the last few years. Basically, clean tech in Australia, I think, was seen as potentially impacting the economy almost negatively. You know, like. Yes, sure, we can clean up our waste and we can be more energy efficient, but there's a economic cost. I think over the last few years, there's been really quite a massive shift to a realization that this is the new economy and this is the opportunity. And so instead of seeing it as a problem, seeing this as an opportunity for us to take. And this will create great new jobs for our children and our society. It's you know, I'm more optimistic than I've been for this sector, you know, for a long time. And so I think that collaborating, the more we can collaborate, the quicker we will get there.
That's great. So I just want to pause and just remind our attendees that they're very welcome to participate in the discussion using the chat function there. So send us any comments or questions for our panelists. Now, just building on what you were saying there, and we're just so hungry for optimism these days. So I'd like to talk a bit more about that, around how you see the sort of clean tech clusters moving the industry forward, and perhaps talking about that around what role are we already seeing our innovation clusters, our clean tech clusters play in the COVID-19 recovery. Did we see that in the bushfire recovery, in any disaster recovery context really, but obviously in particular to COVID? What are we already seeing, Bianca, around the world, and Nigel, yourself in Australia? And what's the scope? What's the potential? If it was a highly leveraged sector here in Australia, what could be possible? Bianca, I might throw to you first to tell us what's happening overseas, what you've seen, what role the clusters have been playing.
Thank you so much. Well, during the COVID crisis and now in a almost post-COVID era, we are seeing, I guess you agree, that this crisis is being an accelerant of trends. Let's think digitalization. What we are doing at this moment is basically the biggest digitalization experiment at global level that ever happened. So that the shift is really big. there's a different speed, there's a velocity of change that we are facing at the moment. Same is happening with the greenification of cities, of industries, of our society, and that is because now the world is more aware of this space of opportunity. But actually, I think besides the enormous opportunity, we now have an imperative to act. And there's where clusters come into picture. Now, during COVID in Europe, we had this, of course, as everywhere, the crisis of reaching out to masks, to respiratory machines, and clusters have played a key role, a crucial role here in connecting different companies, in orchestrating within their territory companies that have shifted their production basically. For example, in the Valencian region, one of the global biggest solar inverter manufacturer that is located here in the Valencian region has shifted production to produce these breathing machines for COVID patients in a collaboration with a smaller SME here in the region. And actually it manages to produce a quarter in no time, a quarter of the material needed at that moment at the peak of COVID cases in Spain. So these things have happened all over Europe, and clusters have been that agile, very fast mechanism that connected very quickly the companies, and that have also tackled the disruptions in the value chain, and this is continuing. This is a work that is in progress. You can have more information on the European Cluster Collaboration Platform and the European Clusters Alliance, and that is doing very active work in this sense. Now, there's a very interesting issue now related to COVID and to clustering, particularly to Cleantech, which is the recovery. And specifically the green recovery, because in Europe at the moment, we have the next financial program for over the next 7 years, 2021, 2027, that will place the green recovery at the heart. We have the European Green Deal with €1 trillion budget that needs to be implemented, massive investments for the cleantech sector that will definitely need smart mechanism to implement, to create projects, to execute projects, to energize multiple stakeholders and bring them at the table to create impactful projects. So that one more time, clusters becoming even higher on the agenda as crucial mechanism to accelerate this change. And then we have the Next Generation EU, which is the recovery package with 750 billion euro, also placing the green economy again at the heart. So it's a crucial moment, I think, for Europe, with clusters in the lead. Clusters have already been leading in specific sectors. But now they are all called to create a shift. And not only cleantech specific clusters, we have about 250 clusters specifically focused on cleantech in Europe, but also all industrial clusters, the more than 2,500 that are called to greenify their production. So therefore, there's a huge space of opportunity to do things differently at the moment, and clusters will be there to take this lead.
Yeah, fabulous. I mean, when, we've used the word pivot so much in the last little while, haven't we? But, pivoting and dealing with disruption that's the DNA of a cluster, right? That's really what they live and breathe, and that's entirely what they're designed to do. So, where clusters are strong, they're better placed to respond quickly and rapidly to these incredible opportunities that are clearly presenting themselves. Nigel, did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, look, I think just 2 points there. I think, often there's opportunities that in one organisation or an individual group can't tackle, but a few organisations together can have all the pieces to work on a problem. One of the difficult problems. So what clustering does is it can create new opportunities for those organisations to work in areas where they mightn't have thought that they could work, you know. But so that's one of the keys for clustering, is that it creates new markets and new opportunities.
Yeah.
The second thing I think is that we're in a time now where science and technology is really important for us. You know, we have to, we're trying to work through this COVID-19 issue. In Australia, we had bushfires, and I think in many ways in Australia we did lose the importance of science and engineering in our future, and I think that you know, we're seeing that it is an important way forward for us. And in the clean tech sector, you know, we can't move forward. We're not going to sacrifice our economic livelihoods. We have to look for ways of having a high standard of living without compromising the environment. And it's going to require a huge shift. Absolutely huge shift, and so, you know, that's the opportunity, and so I think we've got to embrace tackling these problems. And climate change is a crucial one, because we've just, it's been too hard, and people haven't wanted to act purposefully on it. You know, there's been a lot of research and a lot of development, but it's basically been telling us what we've known for the last really close to over 40 years. So, you know, we do have to gain confidence in our ability to make a difference, make a change, but make it part of the economy, and that's what clean tech clusters can help do. Deliver policy, deliver good policy in strong economic outcomes, creating jobs and opportunities for the future that doesn't compromise the planet that we live in.
And it's somewhat changing the narrative from sort of the pursuit of economic growth and shifting that to the discussion around economic development, and that might not necessarily always be growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we've had a great contribution from Stephen, who's joining us this evening, and he says recent bushfires are a stimulus to look at clusters for energy, clean energy and circular economies. Traditional business and industries have less reliance, particularly in regional areas. Yeah, so true. Yeah, thank you for that, Stephen. Very pertinent comment. So we've touched on climate change there. I think I'd be absolutely told off if I didn't let Bianca talk more about that, because this is what she lives and breathes. And I'd love to know really a bit more about the role that clusters play in system innovation and the sustainability transition, because you've got just so many compelling case studies there, Bianca.
Well, definitely there are numerous examples in Europe of networks, clusters that have created shifts in this space, in the clean tech space, in the climate related space. From clusters like, for example, a cluster in Sweden that has shifted from a forestry cluster to a bioeconomy cluster, creating innovation in this space, broadening the scope, to clusters in the Netherlands or focus on water that have become a reference, pushing innovation in the market in the circular economy, shifting from purely water to broader scope again, accelerating massively innovation to market. From ocean clusters in the north of Europe as well, and then coming to the south For example, in the smart city in Valencia, we are connecting more than 70 cities with as problem owners, with businesses as solution providers, and with funders to co-create the cities of the future and accelerate the shift. And only in this past 2 years, there's been a few millions of euros of public investment directed to this as an outcome of this work. So that's a way where we could create shifts, because we speak about climate change, but climate change that doesn't happen by itself. Producing innovation against climate change doesn't happen by itself. We need to orchestrate that. We need a sophisticated orchestration, I would say. And then maybe, as I said, the examples are numerous, but maybe I would like to give an example also what clustering at European level is. For example, the European Battery Alliance, which is an alliance of 400 stakeholders coming from different parts of industry, from different sectors, from the investment community, and that has the aim to capture a new market worth of 250 billion euros per year in 2025. So that is a way of creating this platform, this clustering effort to create big shifts, because we do need, for these big challenges that we have, we do need big shifts. And already before this crisis, our indicators were showing that in order to manage to get to those Paris Agreement targets, to achieve them, we needed to go 6 times faster than the maximum speed that we had achieved until this crisis. So the challenge is quite big, and that is why clusters who can catalyze change at speed and scale are now more needed than ever. Now also clusters need to be a critical mass of clusters at global level needs to be aware of this opportunity that lies in their hands. Many times clusters are not aware that is a possibility, that is a role for themselves. So there's also a shift needed here in the way clusters think about and look at themselves, in which governments look at themselves, in which governments look at clusters as well, and the power that they can have by enhancing this collaboration. And for this reason, by working with the highest industrial leaders at European level and with European institutions, but also with hundreds of cluster managers basically across Europe in the past years, I launched the Clusters of Change movement, which is basically a movement with now hundreds of cluster managers, practitioners, but also government leaders and innovation builders that join this platform, which is clustersofchange.eu, which is basically creating a new generation of cluster leaders, open, multi-collaborative, innovation and entrepreneurship driven, cross-sectorial, working on mission-oriented approach, and enhancing and making a dent on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's quite clear what the job to be done, what our job is, and we just need to get our hands at work. And the access to this platform is free of charge for any cluster across the globe. So for people that are connected here and they listen to this webinar, they are more than welcome to join this wave, I would say, and they will find lots of resources there, including a Clusters of Change manual that actually goes step by step in how to build a cluster, how to build a successful and financially self-sustainable or not fully reliant on subsidies clusters with big impact.
Such valuable resources. So, you know, anybody in Australia needs that's interested in this space needs to be accessing that for sure. Nigel, I'm sure you are already well connected in there and the clusters that you're dealing with. There's a question for you, Nigel, just before we move on. We're talking still around clusters helping to drive the response to climate change. And someone has asked, do you think we will ever see an Australian Green Deal? Putting you on the spot a bit there. You're an optimist. I know you are.
It depends what the deal is, but look, I think that there will be a change, and we're in the midst of a change. We've got a new generation coming up that I think a lot of positive signs from that new generation, and they can see that a different deal is required, basically. And I think that that's a clean tech deal, to be honest. Green is well, it probably has some political connotations. I think we can bypass politics, and we talk about jobs and economy, but just doing it in a sustainable way, a sensible way. Why hurt our natural capital? It just doesn't make sense from a business perspective, or from an economic perspective. So, a lot of the measures that we have aren't quite right for the society that we're living in. They might have been right 100 years ago when natural capital was not being impacted the way it is now. But we do need a new deal, and I think it's a clean tech deal. I think it's not compromising the economy. It's not compromising jobs. It's just creating a different way in which we work and live on this planet.
And it makes sense to use clusters as a platform for that, in that it brings together such a diverse range of businesses and connects so many different sectors and industries together. So, that's ticking all of the government boxes, isn't it? So that sounds a good deal to me.
Absolutely. And I think, honestly, we can learn from each other. I think it's great when you're in a cluster and you've got people from the state government on the board, people from private companies, people from research and development. You learn how the other is thinking, and that makes it easier to find solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another question, which is an excellent question, around how do you deal with members of a cluster who are ordinarily competing against each other? How do you get them to collaborate? How do you win those hearts and minds? And I mean, I know myself, I've worked as a cluster manager in previous years, and have a lot of stories about, cluster participants that for 30 years wouldn't have a beer together, but eventually through the cluster we actually got them exhibiting at trade shows, wearing regional branding and sharing a booth, and they were never going to be best friends, but they knew that this was good business. So how do you do that? How do you get the people working together when they're ordinarily competing? Bianca, either of you can answer that. I know you can.
I can make a start. I'm happy to make a start. Yeah, well, this is very interesting, and I've heard many times this question, and it's always an open question when you speak about clustering. I would say that the role of a cluster leader is key here. Because especially when we think about clean tech industry, there's a huge pie here, right, for everybody. And not even if we all get together to work smoothly and as efficient as possible, we still have a lot of opportunities that are there that we don't reach, we don't get to, to them, because there's so much to do there. There's so much to do to achieve those climate goals. There's so much to do to harness all the clean tech opportunities. We were mentioning before, that the cleantech industry is so broad, so diverse, from renewables to clean hydrogen and storage and circular economy. So there's so much there. But I think the key of a cluster leader here is in making businesses and members in a cluster aware that we need to, that by building from within, and by exploring and harnessing all these opportunities, everybody is served, to put it in this way. So I think the key is to build from within, bottom up, looking almost in a tailored way at the particular needs of every partner, and then you integrate these different needs, and then the magic starts. And I think also one of the magic formulas is to create in the cluster what I call the Ikea effect. You know, you go to Ikea, you buy your product, but then you need to assemble your furniture at home. So you are part of that process. You co-create that, and that's why you like it even more when you see it nicely put in your house. So that's the key: co-creating from within together with these members, and then creating these shifts. And in this way, you create a repeatable, scalable business model. You create huge opportunities, and then people follow because they want to be part of this change. They want to be part of these waves of opportunity that you create. And I think that's, again, comes back to the what's beautiful in working for a cluster and in a cluster, and magical, because you drill down into the opportunities, into the needs of the industry, into the needs of the investment community, and then you connect them and you create loads of opportunities. You just need to put the focus where needed, and honestly work almost in a tailored way, in a tailored fashion, in order to really be specific on what the need is and what is possible, what is needed, and how you make it happen.
Yeah, perfect. Nigel, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, look, I agree with everything that Bianca said there. I think that the key is growing the cake, you know, and I think increasingly, you know, we're in a global marketplace, and if you're not focused on that, you're not going to be successful. So part of, I think, what a cluster does is it changes the opportunity that a cluster member can partake in, and that reduces competition. So instead of seeing someone as a competitor, you see them as a potential collaborator. So, you know, you're working within the cluster to create opportunities, not just where you're based, or the state or province or centre where you're based, but outside. And so I think that a key ingredient for a cluster is ambition. You know, you need to want to, you know, if you're a member, you would need to want to, you know, be challenging what you're doing and seeking new opportunities.
Yeah, that's a really good point, to seek ambition, absolutely. And I think it's probably important on that question as well, just touching back on what you said about leadership. We've talked about it should be industry-led, bottom-up. So we know we need industry champions, but what we also know is that we need a dedicated cluster manager. So when we talk about leadership, it's sort of twofold, isn't it? There's that often volunteer industry person pushing it forward, and they're running their business and supporting the cluster. But the importance of that dedicated cluster manager, I think, can't be overstated. They're, you know, a rare gem. We describe them as they're the bridge builder, the glue, and they need to be paid positions. They can't just be voluntary. Would you agree with that, Bianca?
Totally. We need a dedicated person, preferably neutral, not being linked to any particular business in the cluster, and that energizes the cluster members. And can act with this neutral perspective, but also with a lot of generosity, spreading opportunity, sharing opportunities for each and every of the member. And I think that's how clusters become most successful or most efficient. Definitely the figure of cluster manager is key here, because otherwise things don't happen. And in my view, a cluster is, well, you can look at the cluster manager from different angles. A cluster manager always wears different caps. Sometimes cluster manager has to be a cheerleader, energize the whole community. Other times need to be a sponge, getting this information, know-how from different levels, and then expand it when needed, and reorganize it, reshape it, tailor the messages, integrate them. But mostly, cluster manager is an empathy master, I think, because we definitely need to connect with all these stakeholders together. And it's not the same that you speak with venture capitalists or with the corporate venture capitalists, that you speak with entrepreneur or you speak with the government or a mayor. Right? So it's very important to have this openness, and I would say even generosity in spreading opportunities towards across the sector. Cluster managers are definitely keys, because successful clusters don't happen by magic. Yeah, they happen because they are led. And I think in clusters we need less management and more leadership, and that's what I call all cluster managers to be in Europe, to be the leaders of change, because they have this power and they need to use it.
Yeah, and what you say there about clusters don't just happen by magic, right in the beginning we talked about that they were accelerators of innovation, and what we know is that innovation doesn't just happen, that culture of connectivity doesn't just happen. It has to be actually driven and fired up in a targeted way. And so that role is so critical. Now, we've got only about 3 or 4 minutes left. So, Nigel, I just wanted to get your take on, we know that there are enormous opportunities in this sector for Australia. What do Australian clean tech businesses need to do right now to move to the next level, to accelerate innovation and crack global markets? If you could just give us your wish list, to bring it all forward.
Well, I think there's 2 things. One is that the sector hasn't been great at marketing its successes. So, part of what we have to do as a cluster, as a group, is that we have to let the decision makers know that this is an important part of the economy. It's a growing part of the economy, and it's creating lots of jobs and economic activity. And so to do that, we have to make sure that we get the message out, and so that. That's in social media. It's to the community. It's to key members of different governments, and that's really a very, very critical thing, I think, for us to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And is that something that the cluster that you're leading is taking the role and doing that work on behalf of the sector?
Absolutely. We're doing a lot of work in social media, and we're also looking at a podcast. So using the modern mechanisms for communication to get out there. And our target is to champion the successes, so that the community, we believe in this area, and we can see the good things that are happening. Because without that, we could be doing lots of things, but we just won't get the attention and the interest that we deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect note to leave it on. Collaboration is absolutely key to taking this sector to the next level. Clusters are the perfect mechanism in which for that to be achieved. And so thank you for your work here in Australia. And Bianca, thank you so much for contributing to today's to today's discussion. Now, our participants, I'm sure, can be connected to both of you through Tiffany following the session and through the conference, and perhaps links can be sent to the resources that you mentioned, Bianca. I think there would be some interest in that. So I think I will end the session there, handing back to Tiffany to wrangle us as we say good evening. Thank you all for joining us. It was a great session, I think.
Thanks, Jacqueline, Nigel, Bianca. Really appreciate you sharing your insights with everyone today, and also thank you to our audience for the questions. Really illustrated well the potential of clusters, and it's great to also hear the optimism around the building of those in Australia as well. So thank you once again. Just of course, you can see on the slide there, our next online event is on the 30th of July. NCTCE is proudly partnering with SA Partners to present a live, interactive online masterclass. So this 2-hour hands-on session is around organisational improvement, and Kai of SA Partners will be walking you through the development of your own actionable lean and green game plan, one that you can immediately implement in your business. So for more details, please see the NCTCE website. And I will be sending out all of the links and the resources that were mentioned today in the discussion. So thank you once again to everybody, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Cleantech conversation.